Hello and welcome back to the shop. It's been a while since I posted a video, so it's high time I got one out. The break has been due partly because it's just summer and there's family activities. I've also had a couple false starts on videos where I start a video that I think I can publish, but it gets held up. That's happened twice. Hopefully I'll be able to release those videos. I'm not going to get into why they're held up, but anyway, been working through that. Today, it's high time I got an update to you on the twin turbo Vises that many of you bought. Now, if you want to skip the vast majority of this video, here are the highlights. This is the updated design, and you're looking at the 14-inch, so the smallest of the three Vises. The key functionality is exactly the same, the performance is marginally better, and I think the look is better. Next point, all parts have been ordered for all the Vises, all the sizes. It's all in production. I'm still looking good for an October ship date. And the Vises are up for sale, up for pre-sale. Link in description to my website. They are slightly more expensive than they were in the Kickstarter, but not as expensive as they will be once I have them all in hand and they ship out immediately after a purchase. So you're still getting a pre-sale price, so check that out if you're interested. One more thing I forgot to mention when I was down in the shop. If you buy the Vises right now, I ordered extra from the initial Kickstarter order. So if you buy right now, you'll get your Vise in October. At some point, I'm going to run through that extra inventory and I'll have to place another order, and that'll push it back to like January, February of next year. So if you want to get in on that, pick them up before I run out of extras. Okay, so for the rest of this video, I want to describe the minor changes I've made to this Vise versus the prototype, talk a little bit about why I made them, and just give you some clarity on why a redesign was necessary in the first place. So the first thing that's different is the internal mechanism to put the Vise in high gear, how that gear that travels engages with the gear behind it to give you that 4-to-1 speed ratio. So on the old Vise, this is what you had. This is the center hub with these 8 pins. Ignore the fact that I'm missing a pin. This is just the last one, and that one of the press fit pins was loose, which is part of the whole problem with this. The press fit was a bit of a pain, and I think I would have had problems with the manufacturer trying to get that right every time. Press fits are bad and to be avoided. But anyway, the way this worked is the first gear, the low speed gear, would go on here, and then some very small clip rings, retaining rings, would hold this in place. And then when you push it forward, there's 8 holes in the high speed gear, would engage with those, and then you'd be driving this gear directly and you'd have your high speed. That's how that would work. So besides just the press fit being a bit problematic, there were only 8 positions to get to high speed, whereas for reasons I'll describe in a second, with the updated version there's 15. So it's harder to find high speed in this version. Not the end of the world, but a much bigger problem if you consider this gear is loose, so essentially it can be just completely ignored. So think about the way these are coupled together. You have all those press fit pins cantilevering out to high speed. Then I hear comments from people like, I'm just going to leave it in high speed all the time because it's pretty smooth anyway and I get enough gripping force with the cork rubber, and I can picture people really pushing hard on this. And if the base of that press fit starts to erode and get compressed, then the pin wobbles more, and over time they could become loose, especially if people are leaving this in high gear and just tugging on that handle a bit harder than maybe I was anticipating. So that was keeping me up at night. Had to change that. So this is the solution. This gear right here has 5 holes tapped in it with bolts sticking out. You can see as they go around. Doesn't affect anything when we are just in low speed or even in neutral. That gear misses them. When you push it forward, the teeth of this gear engage on those bolts and they're coupled together. So that's how you, since this is a 15 tooth gear, this front one, that's how you get 15 different positions for high speed. Much, much stronger. And instead of those press fit pins, this gear is held on with a retaining ring, and it has a square inner recess that mates up with square faces on the center hub to lock them together for rotation. Now I'm going to include this all assembled with the retaining ring on when I ship it, because I know not everyone has one of these tools. So that's the what and the why of this change, and that's probably the biggest change that was made for this final version. Okay, so next difference. The milled section of the screw is a bit different. So this is the version that you saw in the Kickstarter, and this is the version that I'll be shipping to people. So you notice a few things immediately. This is longer. I'll get into that actually in the next difference. And also the diameter is bigger. So a bigger diameter just means more strength. You don't want to turn any further than the inner diameter of the screw than you need to. So the question that you might ask is, well, why'd you turn this one so small? And that has to do with the bushings. See, when you're building 10 prototypes, you need to stick with existing bushings that are on the market. And even though this catalog is very extensive, it doesn't have the perfect bushing to just cut barely through the inner diameter of the threads to preserve as much of the shaft strength as you can. But when over 500 people buy your vise, you have the resources to have a custom mold made for all the bushings, actually, this one included, and then I could specify the inner diameter to be exactly what I needed to leave as much shaft material. So I was really excited about this change. It's a subtle, small thing, but it takes advantage of as much of the strength of the screws that was possible, and I'm just really glad I was able to do this one. So that's the story on the diameter. And lastly, this end section is a little different. In the old version, there was a piece that fit over this shaft with a hole in it. You drive a spring pin through it, and then it has two more press fit pins that fit into the gear, and that's what engages this to the gear, so that when the gear turns, the shaft turns. So a few issues here. First of all, it's another press fit, and that was going to cause problems just like the last press fit. Also, this is something that the user needs to install. I need to ship these screws loose to get the packaging and shipping costs down. And I am passing those savings on to you, by the way. And driving in a spring pin sounds simple, but I'm telling you, it is not. They don't want to go in, and you're at risk for bending and breaking the vise. It's a real pain. So the spring pin was bad, the press fit was bad. Yeah, no good. So in the new version, that's eliminated. There's going to be a retaining ring that holds this to the body of the vise, and I'm going to include a tool to install that retaining ring, because that is something the user is going to have to do. With that tool, it's not a hard thing. Much easier than driving in that spring pin. And then there are square faces milled into the end of the shaft that made up with the gear. So the gear turns the shaft just because of that those square faces. So this is better, more user-friendly, stronger, just all around better design, and it was only possible with volume. I wouldn't have been able to do, well, I probably could have done this end part for the Kickstarter prototype, but to be honest, I just didn't think of it. But I couldn't have done the bigger diameter. That needed the scale economies and volumes involved with a successful Kickstarter. So, thanks for that. And lastly, why is it longer? Let's take a look at the actual body of the vises. So there's nothing really magic about this one. But having this pipe longer creates two advantages. Now, first of all, one of the nice features of that pipe is that when you open the vise just a little ways and drop the board in, it doesn't hit the screws. So the longer that is, the longer you preserve that functionality for thicker and thicker boards. So it's functionally better to have it longer. And there's also a torque advantage on the back bushings. The longer it is, the more mechanical advantage you have, and the lower the friction on these bushings. So it operates more smoothly the longer you make this pipe. So for this version, I made it as long as I could, given the spacing between the nut and the bushing. So this is the previous prototype version. As you can see, it's quite a bit smaller. I don't really have an excuse for why I didn't just do this in the first place with the prototype. Didn't think it through completely and take advantage of everything I could with this design. So this actually makes a pretty substantial difference. It's operating a lot more smoothly for a couple reasons, but I think primarily it's operating more smoothly because of this increased length. But this next thing I'm going to mention also makes a difference. So this is the bushing that you saw in the Kickstarter campaign that holds the end of the threaded rod in place with the nut behind it. And this is the version that I'm going to be shipping to people. So this is a oil impregnated bronze bushing pressed into the steel housing, whereas this is just steel. I know I said the dirty word of press fit, but this manufacturer has convinced me they can do this reliably and really get a good fit that's going to stay in place, and you have the lower friction material on what is a pretty substantial point of friction. All the weight is pushing down on this jaw, all gets taken up by this point, and the screw turns against it. So this is not an insignificant effect that this bushing will have. Now this one was only possible with a bigger order. I had to have a mold made custom for this inner piece, and that would have been too expensive to do for a prototype. Just not justifiable, but I can do it now, so you get a better vise. So the last thing to talk about that I'm sure you've noticed is the spoked gears, and this is something I've mentioned in a few posts of why I think this is better. Mostly it's an aesthetic thing. I think that with the spokes you can see more depth. The gears is this stacked set of gears here in the middle. You can see more of what's happening back there, and it's easier to see the gear shift mechanism and so on. I just think it really looks good. There's some functional benefit too. Getting rid of that weight is good for shipping. It's good for the downward force this is creating and putting that causes friction on the bushings, so the lighter the better. It'll operate more smoothly. There's a little bit less starting torque to get everything going if the gears weigh less. None of these are big advantages, but they are advantages. Spoked gears did cost me a little bit more. It was not a cost savings thing because these are laser cut. Doing the spokes just causes more time on the machine, which makes them incrementally more expensive, but I thought it was worth it. Oh, and I decided to make the handle stainless steel, just because that's the part you're gripping all the salts from your hand. So, stainless on the handle. Doing the whole thing in stainless would cost a fortune, but I could do the handle. That wasn't too bad. So that's it. I hope you found this interesting. Check out the purchase page, link in description for these vises if you want to pick them up on pre-sale. Well, they're still at a discount. But I'm going to get back to making this a reality and actually getting these in people's hands. See you soon.